Hey guys, how's it going? Kripp here. So today I want to give you guys a Diablo 4 video, and I think it is maybe the biggest problem, like mechanically, with the game. Now, with that said, I have been thoroughly enjoying myself playing Diablo 4. I am probably still streaming all day right now, so why don't you come by and check out the stream? I'm on my way to 100 and maybe doing some Uber content afterwards on my Firewall Sorceress. Now, moving forward, what are we talking about? We are talking about resistances. Resistances like fire resist, cold resist, poison resist, that kind of stuff. This mechanic is so broken that I feel that it might even be bugged. There are many different mechanics that improve the survivability of your character in Diablo 4. You can get armor. You can get resistances even. You can get reduced damage taken. You can get reduced damage taken on a condition if the target is burning, if it's distant, if it's close, so on. If it's vulnerable, there's lots of those conditions. And in general, the survivability in the game is pretty fair, I would say, until you get to the really high level nightmare dungeons. And the reason for that is pretty specific. It is that the damage taken and damage done formulas have to do with the level differential between the two targets. Meaning that if my enemy is much higher level than me, it will do more damage just because it's higher level than me, and I will do less damage to it just because it's higher level than me. And you might be thinking, well, there's level scaling. How are things higher level than you? The Nightmare Dungeon system and a few other endgame mechanics escape this level scaling system to provide these results, more or less. Now, resistances. So, I play a sorceress. Sorceress, in my case, means firewall, and that means burning damage, and that means int stacking. I have possibly one of the highest int stats into the game because you convert crit damage into burning damage multiplied by a portion of your intelligence. So I have a really big incentive to get int. Int also provides all resists. In addition to the all resists it provides, I have a lot of all resist nodes that I fully satisfy. I even am buffing some of them with high level glyphs. So what I'm trying to say is I'm playing the character that gets the most resistance, that I invest in resistance, and that I hyper invest in resistance, right? Now, on this character, we first have to see how resistances work. So if we look at the tooltips in the game, it will give you all the different forms of damage reduction. And you might be thinking, like if we have this gear piece here, cold resistance, 52.2% cold resistance. So right now we have 53.5. So let's equip this and see what happens. Our cold resist went up 4%. So why did it go up 4%? The answer is, I don't know. I have no idea how the resistance system works, but I do know that the mechanics behind resistances are as follows. If you hover over your tooltip, it'll tell you how much damage reduction is as a result of your current resistance levels. So if my chest does not have any cold resistance, just to be clear. So if I have just the rest of my character with int and all the resistances, I have reduced incoming cold damage by 26.8%. And if I equip my other chest, which has lots of cold resistance, it goes up to 28.9%. So 52 cold resist is giving me about 2% reduced cold damage taken. It is a little bit more than that. Okay, it is a little bit more than that. Let me explain. It is a little bit more than that because your armor also applies to resistances. With that said, I have basically close to no investment in armor because as a sorcerer you can't really invest in armor other than a few rolls on your gear. Like I think my pants have 10.9% armor, and I have the single armor node on the Paragon tree. That's how much armor I have. So armor is giving me physical damage reduction 44%, and half of that is applied to elemental damage reduction. So I have 22% damage reduction for all elements and poison and shadow and all that kind of stuff, non-physical. And also, I get half of my resistance value for whatever reason that applies. So I'm getting slightly more elemental mitigation for my resistances that I stack significantly. My highest ones anyway, my lowest ones contribute less, compared to just armor by having a level appropriate character. Okay? So that alone is insane to me. By default, you have as much mitigation from all elements and physical from just wearing gear. And again, I want to point out that if you up your armor, like this has a 10.9 armor roll, it increases your entire mitigation, 5244. So my mitigation goes up 8%. Now only half of that applies. So an armor roll is reduced all damage from all elements by 4 and physical by 8. But again, it's more than that because it's the relative damage taken. The armor roll, if you're curious, in this case, the 10 armor roll on this helmet gives me about 15 less damage taken from physical and about 8 or so less damage taken from non-physical sources. So how is resistance this bad? Well, I feel like resistances are so bad, if you multiplied the effect of resistances on gear by 10, one magnitude higher, it would still be the worst stat. Okay? And we have some numbers to back it up. Here we go. Flashbang. Okay. So as you saw, my character has 44 damage resistance from armor. So half of that is applied, and the cold resistance before the 52 cold resist chest plate, my total DR was 48.8% because it's half the armor plus the resistance. That's why when your resistance goes up by like 2%, if you're overall mitigating about half, the difference in DR is about 4%. But keep in mind, there are 6 damage types in the game. There's physical and non-physical, comprised of the 3 elements, shadow and poison. Okay? Keep that in mind. Armor affects all of them. If I get a resist roll on gear, it only affects that one resistance. And because they add together, you might be thinking that, well, if you have a ton of armor, well, the resistance is going to be more effective. You're right. It will be. So I believe the most you can reduce is 85. Could be wrong about that. I have no idea how you get it that high, by the way. But let's say that you do. Let's say you're playing a barbarian, you have literally perfect gear, and let's say it's actually possible to get damage reduction to 85. And if you do, and your resistances are as high as my sorceress, which would be really amazing if you did, the cold resistance from that chest piece will give you a difference in damage reduction just from cold for 6.8%. So that makes absolutely no sense to me. How is that? Oh, we can forget about those numbers. Okay. Now, when we're comparing other parts of the gear, there are other ways to reduce damage. You can have damage reduction from burning. You can just have damage reduction. Damage reduction is about a 10% roll, something like that. And one type of damage reduction that I find really powerful is damage reduction from close enemies, because most of the time you're going to be taking damage from close enemies. Diablo IV is very much a gritty combat game, even on a sorceress. So if I take the damage reduction from close, now it's not a maximum roll, so we'll just take it at 22%. This is damage reduction from all the elements and from physical by 22%. Yes, it's conditional, but you know, we'll talk about that in a second. So I wanted to kind of figure it out. If I get 22 damage reduction from close from one roll and 4 for just cold from another roll, then you get 5.5 times more damage reduction from close. But because you get it to all 6 damage types, you multiply by 6, it goes to 33. You get 33 times more damage reduction from DR from close than you do from resistances. And if we want to understand what that means in resistance, how much resistance would you actually need to equate the total DR from damage reduction from close, you would need 1,716 resistance. If a roll on gear, instead of it being 52, if it would be over 1,000, it would be reasonable as an alternative for a defensive mechanic. Over 1,000. It's like I said earlier, if we multiply the resistance impact by 10, it's still bad. If we multiply the resistance on gear and paragons by 10, it is still the worst defensive mechanic in Diablo IV. And to give you guys further examples here, if we go backwards on this, if the defensive mechanics were weighted similarly as resistance, let's do the opposite calculation. So we have 4 DR divided by 22, which is the current one, and then divide by 6 again because it's one ailment, it's just one ailment, but then multiply again by 22 because that's how much percentage we have. So it would be 0.67. So the equivalent of 52 cold resist on a piece of gear in terms of damage reduced from close would be, instead, as a stat, you would see damage reduction from close by less than 1%. That would be the equivalent value in resistances. So it is that bad. I don't really know what's happening. It's hard to give a suggestion because there's so many mechanics and so many defensive layers that are within a ballpark of each other. Like the damage reduction from close is a little bit higher than damage reduction from burning, which makes sense. The damage reduction from burning is a little bit higher than the flat-out damage reduction, which makes sense. The armor contribution is pretty similar to the flat damage reduction roll, which makes sense. And then we have resistances that are literally 30 times worse. Okay, it's one of those situations where I feel it's either a completely bugged system or someone forgot part of the equation. They missed a decimal at the very least. And if you don't believe me, you can even look at some of the elixirs. There are elixirs that give you 30% life, and that same tier of elixir gives you 20 resistance. 1/3 more life, or an overall damage reduction value less than 1%. Those are supposed to be in the same ballpark. And obviously I'm talking about damage reduction from close, so if you use the normal damage reduction on stat, it's like half that value. But still, if it's half the value, resistance is like 15 times worse than conventional damage reduction mechanics. So what the hell is going on? Also, I think it is not a coincidence that now that we are approaching high levels of gear, that the people who talk about the different classes and the power levels are ranking Necromancer last and Sorcerer second last. You might be thinking, well, those are the two int-based classes that have a bunch of resistance from their main stat. Yes, that is the case. I also want to point out that Necromancer, because Necromancer has both resistance nodes and armor nodes on the Paragon tree, Necromancer is actually the most affected by the fact that resistances are complete garbage. And Sorcerer, the second most, being the other int-based class. Again, I believe it's bugged because I can't imagine the system would be so out of line with the rest of the game. And again, it seems to affect the worst two classes in the game. But we'll see. It's a very complicated game. My overall issue with the resistances is they're so unbelievably complicated in how they work, but at the same time, they're so bad that when someone equips a piece of gear, they don't know this. They don't know that when they get like a 50 resist roll on a piece of gear, they're going to think it might be good. Where in fact, any form of resistance on any piece of gear is without question the worst stat on it. Don't use a single piece of resistance gear because it is a total waste until they at least review this horrendous system. See you next time.